A Day on the Titanic, 1912. When I opened my eyes, the sea was calm. What stood before me was more than just a dream. It is April 1912. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, I am aboard one of the most massive ships humanity has ever built, the Titanic. This ship promised more than just transportation. It was seen as the pinnacle of human intellect and engineering. The same sentence echoes among the passengers. Even God himself could not sink this ship. Man was so confident that he felt he could leave even the divine out of the equation. The floating splendor of 1912. The moment you step onto the Titanic, you realize this ship isn't sailing on the sea. It's sailing in another world. For first-class passengers, the ship was practically a grand hotel. The magnificent grand staircase lined with marble, halls illuminated by glittering chandeliers, exquisite dishes of French cuisine, cigar lounges accompanied by live music and quiet reading rooms. A passenger would later describe it this way: "We weren't on a ship. We felt like we were in a hotel in Paris." But as you descend below the decks, things change. In third class, people sit on their trunks in cramped cabins. The same ship, but two different lives. The Titanic carries not only the wealthy, but also immigrants heading to America with the hope of a new life. The unsinkable ship. The Titanic was built with 16 watertight compartments. This detail gave the engineers immense confidence. According to their calculations, even if 4 compartments flooded, the ship would not sink. But no one asked, what if it's 5? What if it's 6? Or 7? Years later, a crew member would confess the truth. We were so sure of ourselves, we didn't even feel the need to consider the risks. Life jackets were insufficient. The available lifeboats were not enough for everyone on board. Because when the plans were made, there was only one hypothesis. They would never all be needed at once. That long night. The date is April 14th. The air is freezing, but the sea is as smooth as glass. The lookout spotted a silhouette emerging from the horizon. The warning was given. The ship was forced into a hard turn, but it was already too late. The tremor was slight. Many people didn't even notice it. A surviving passenger. When the Titanic hits the iceberg, there is no panic. There is calm. People are still relaxing. Lifeboats and choices. Who will live? Women and children first. But this rule is not applied equally everywhere. Some lifeboats are lowered half empty. There was room, but people didn't want to get in. Because until that very moment, no one truly believed she would sink. The ship was still grand. The music was still playing. The deck still looked solid. The lifeboats, they seemed like an unnecessary precaution born of panic. A passenger reflected on this years later. Those who got into the lifeboats were looked at as if they were making a mistake. People were hesitant to board the small boats. It was as if leaving the ship was a sign of weakness. Some didn't want to leave the deck. Some went back to their rooms. Some said, "I'll be right back," and never returned. This denial didn't stem from fear. It was born of overconfidence. The belief that the Titanic was unsinkable weighed heavier than what their own eyes were seeing. And that is why the empty lifeboats became one of the heaviest silences of all. Because later, everyone realized the sinking didn't happen all at once. But by the time they believed it, it was too late. The final song. Silent heroes. As the ship tilts, the music still plays. One of the orchestra members is remembered this way. We were afraid, but the music kept people calm. There are different accounts of the final piece played, but the sentiment is the same. Farewell, darkness and cold, the reality of the sea. The sound the Titanic made when it split in two is a sound survivors would never, ever forget. Then the screaming started. For those in the water, there aren't even minutes to spare. The Atlantic is unforgiving. A witness. The silence was more terrifying than the screams. The aftermath. When the ship's lights went out, the sea seemed to hold its breath. The screams faded slowly until only silence remained. For those in the lifeboats, the disaster wasn't over, because after that night, living became a burden to carry. In the middle of the cold, dark Atlantic, they waited in small boats. Around them were only broken fragments, life jackets floating in the water, and bodies that no longer answered. In many boats, the same question was whispered. Should we go back? But the answer was often the same. If we go back, we die too. Those words stayed not in the minds of the survivors, but in their consciences, because not turning back meant staying alive, but it also meant leaving someone behind. Some boats were nearly empty. There was space, but fear weighed heavier. People thought, if we go back, the panicked people might capsize the boat, and we'll all end up in the water. It was a logical decision, but logic could not silence the conscience. When the sun rose, the scene remained the same. The sea was still calm, but there was no one left alive. When the survivors were rescued, no one celebrated. Most were left alone with the same question. Why am I alive? Some couldn't sleep at night for a long time. Some couldn't bear the sound of the sea. Some never spoke again. A woman said years later, "My body was saved, but my mind stayed there that night." For the survivors, the Titanic was not a memory. It was a lifelong burden. They weren't heroes, but they weren't guilty either. Yet, this question never left them. Could I have done more? And perhaps that was the quietest, heaviest thing left behind by the Titanic. The ship sank in a single night, but what was left behind was carried for a lifetime. Closing. What does the Titanic tell us? The Titanic sank, but the real lesson was the blind confidence man had in himself. Eva Hart, 7 years old, in a lifeboat. The screams never left my mind. When the silence came, I was even more afraid. Lawrence Beasley, teacher 2nd class. I was saved, but I couldn't be happy. Charles Lightoller, 2nd officer. In that moment, we thought going back would kill everyone. Archibald Gracie, 1st class passenger. I survived, but in the nights, I was still there.